Chapter 5. Welcome to the binding. We are glad you are here. Standing in a large, beautiful room with several other hooded people, she felt surreal, like she had in the meadow. There was no music playing, but she felt music everywhere. Please, make yourselves comfortable. The binding is one by one, and we will come for you in the order you are ready. Sinking into a plush, feather-stuffed chair, she felt how she had felt the first night at the cave, warm and safe. Unlike in the meadow, her mind was clear, and an overwhelming gratitude rested on her. She was grateful to be there. So many things about the venture did not make sense, but just being comfortable with the not knowing took some of its power and made it more bearable. If you are ready, it is your turn. A kind old man reached out to help her stand. This is the Queen's chamber. Her protection lasts until the binding is complete, and is the only place in the venture that cannot be touched by dark magic. He led her to a table full of items. You may select your gift to take with you. She looked at the table, and though each item was beautiful, many were ordinary objects. A pen, a map, a shield, paints, a harp, a lantern, medicine, a sword, a mirror, an endless amount of objects. How would she choose? Remembering the cloak selection and feeling the calmness of the musicless music, she instinctively reached for the compass. Hesitating, she wondered what good a compass would be without the map, or knowing where she was even going. Maybe she should choose the sword or the shield. Looking at the table, some items seem easier to rule out. What good would paints or a pen be? Surely a harp would be a silly choice compared to a lantern. She could see no purpose at all in the mirror. The musicless music seemed to be coming to her like a soft breeze, and she reached again for the compass. The man smiled gently at her. A good choice. It suits you. They walked to a door together. Hold the compass to your chest. Looking down, she noticed a butterfly clasp. How had she not noticed it before? She placed the compass under the clasp and gasped as the compass dissolved into her cloak. Pulling her now empty hand from her chest, she looked at the man, who was grinning. That is my favorite part. And with that, he opened the door. Page break. Adjusting to the dark, she chided herself for not choosing the lantern. But how would an absorbed lantern even work? Dark wasn't her favorite, but she had just left the Queen's chamber and still felt its calm despite the darkness. Walking forward, she wasn't sure if she saw the light or heard a voice first, but she knew she was close to others. Her eyes were adjusting as the hazy images came into view. Welcome. A kind voice and kind eyes met her. Each of us represents one of the king's daughters. I represent Akish, and will show you the tale of what has been and what may come. Guiding her to a nearby bench, they sat together as Akish began to paint a story with strokes of color that did not need words. She watched the three young sisters play together and grow together. Each was as talented as the other, but in different ways. Confusion came, and a need to know who would rule the others slowly changed the colors from vibrant to edges that no longer shone. The venture was proposed and accepted, and some of the edges' colors returned as the sisters developed on their quest. But spots of sludge dropped on the ever-changing painting. The venture was no longer enough to hold the shine, and the colors changed again. Now, more than the edges and the spots of sludge, the very essence of the painting had almost no color. The sludge grew from the middle of the painting and spread to the edges, covering the story completely. With a quick brushstroke, a new story began. Instead of children, there were seeds. She knew she was one of the seeds, and in knowing that, a seed seemed to come closer. She watched the seed fill with light. It was beautiful. Mesmerized, she waited for it to grow to see what it would become, but with a quick brushstroke, it was gone. Another woman was coming towards her. She wanted to stay and ask what had become of the seed, but Akish was gone. What had just happened? I know how you feel, but you don't need to fear, the lady spoke sympathetically. I represent Divya, and I will help sort you into the team you will be in. She knew how all 3 stories ended and was not sure she wanted to be in a team named after any of them. Divya laughed. The names are only meant to sort you. They were standing in front of a basin of water. Scoop a handful of water out. She did. The basin of water filled with dirt. Pour the water on the dirt. As she did, the water seemed to run endlessly from her hand, and ivy wrapped around her forearm as if from nowhere. Eliana. And as she said it, she left, and another lady was there. I represent Eliana, the team for which you have been selected. How did she know I was from Eliana? Eliana smiled. We know when you come in. If you had been Divya, I would have welcomed you, and Akish would have shown you your sorting. But how? Maybe you want to know a different answer. That sounded like Aneth. In a moment, you will leave the Queen's chamber. She was confused. Hadn't she already left? You will be greeted by the others who were sorted into Eliana. In the morning, the venture will start. What? Was that it? Was the binding complete? Looking around, she noticed she was alone. A door was a few steps away. She looked at the door and then back from where she had just come. I am missing something. She started replicating the entire day in her mind, finding nothing that helped her make sense of where she was. She let the thoughts continue, and in her mind re-entered the Queen's chamber. She remembered the soothing feeling of sitting in the chair and hearing the man tell her, "This is the Queen's chamber. Her protection lasts until the binding is complete and is the only place in the venture that you cannot be touched by the dark magic. You may select your gift to take with you." She replayed the scene, somehow knowing the answer was there. Frustrated, she continued replaying what happened after receiving the gift. She had walked through the door, thinking she was leaving the Queen's chamber. It had been dark, so her mind was thinking of what had been said about dark magic. There had been so many unusual things that she had gotten confused. It had been dark, but she had not left the Queen's chamber. She was still in the Queen's chamber, meaning she still had her protection, and the binding was incomplete. What was she missing? Why was the binding not complete? She began to pace. She liked the feeling of her cloak as it danced around her. She stopped. She had the Queen's protection. The dark magic could not reach her. Why would she want to leave and lose that? She had been so worried she had done something wrong, which was why the binding was incomplete. She had missed the fact that she still had total protection. She laughed at herself. She never planned on leaving. She would stay where it was safe, and she was protected. Page break. Something was nagging at her, but she could not bring it forward to look at it. Why would anyone leave if they knew leaving meant losing their protection? Maybe people walked through the door before they understood what they were doing. She was very glad she hadn't fallen for that mistake. She had left the safety of the river because she knew she was being called to the mountains, but this was different. She heard Aneth's voice. "There is no foolishness in hearing the call, child, and that is why, like the river, you cannot stay or go back. You must go forward." No. Again, Aneth's voice came. "Forward, child, like the river. Move forward." If she had the Queen's protection and no dark magic could reach her, why was she so scared even in the Queen's chamber? Fear. She could not remember a time without fear. She had always tried to look brave, but she had been afraid of everything. Learning to ride a horse, things under the water while swimming, getting the wrong answer with Palef, the dark, and her father. Her father. Fear. Sitting on the ground, her cloak wrapped around her, she let her mind go still. She was sitting on her mother's lap by the fire. Her mother was telling her the story of Wistera. Neither of them had heard the door open behind them. Quickly, and with no words, he grabbed her mother's arm and pulled her out of the room. She heard their steps down the hall. Then silence. She had watched the fire die before taking herself to bed. Mother had left on her trip before she woke. Numb. Wrapped in her cloak, she stared at the floor. She knew fear. It had been one of her earliest memories. Fear had never left her like her mother had. Great sobs welled in her as she realized how much she missed her mother. She had not allowed herself to grieve. Her mother was coming back someday, but she hadn't. The finality of something so long suppressed forced its way out of the carefully constructed cage in her mind. The pain was searing and engulfing, and losing reality to it, her body shook on the ground. Gentle arms wrapped over her torso, loving hands stroked her shoulder and face, supportive hands anchored her legs. Time had no meaning as past and present united. Page break. Divya and Akish had left when they were no longer needed. Eliana remained, devotedly monitoring the rise and fall of her breathing. She wasn't asleep, but clearing a sleep-like fog from her brain as her mind grappled with reality. She had tried to verbalize several times the agony she was in, but had no words or direction on how to express the nothingness and entirety of what she felt. She liked the coolness of the floor on her face and the weight of her cloak, which felt like a blanket soothing her. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Eliana said with deep empathy. She continued to stare at the floor, but she had heard her and was grateful she wasn't alone. Knowing what her mind had protected her from as a child was both horrifying and freeing. No longer needing to fight to keep the memory hidden, her mind felt lighter somehow, which did not make sense. As if the closure of her deep longing filled a hole in her being. In some way, she felt more complete. How could that be? She yawned, a deep and whole body yawn. A smile spread across Eliana's face. "How lovely to see you shifting." Confused at what a yawn or shifting had to do with anything, she sat up, stiff from being on the floor too long. Eliana was sitting close to her, but she didn't feel uncomfortable. If anything, she felt connected to her. She looked at the door once again, mindful of her decision. She could stop and not be affected by the dark magic, or she could continue and go on the venture. She pulled her cloak closer around her and hugged her knees as she thought of what it had taken to get there. She replayed her freezing water escape, and how miserable and how afraid she had been. It had been worth it when she found him. But leaving him and the protection of the cave had been really hard. Leaving the security of the river had been scary. Meeting Aneth had been serendipitous. Choosing a cloak and the confusion of the meadow had been strenuous on her mind, but receiving the compass had been enthralling. The three sister representatives, she stopped and thought of each part. Akish had painted the most enchanting story, and she could feel the wisdom gleaned from watching the sisters' choices. She knew that when the seed filled with light, she had also been changed. She had felt wonder and amazement when the water kept flowing from her hand. Just thinking about it made her feel powerful. The ivy wrapping around her arm had been captivatingly beautiful, and had filled her with awe. Straining, she tried to remember what had happened with Eliana. She looked at Eliana's face, seeking a visual clue. Eliana smiled serenely at her. What had Eliana told or shown her? She couldn't think of anything Eliana had said or done before she left her alone to go through the door. Perplexed, her mind went to what happened next. She did not feel she needed to think about that any longer. A thought wanted to form in her mind, but she pushed it away. She did not want to think anymore. Pieces of the thought came and again were pushed away, stopping it from forming fully. Not to be ignored, the thought came anyway. What is it about the dark magic that keeps you from moving forward? It was a ridiculous question, not worth answering, but tired from the mental exhaustion, she answered anyway, hoping to have a reprieve. The dark part. She heard her mind's response. But you walked in the dark before you met Akish. Annoyed, she took the bait. The dark and dark magic are not the same thing. You are right. She smiled smugly, annoyed by the conversation. There was darkness in what happened to your mother. She felt her lungs constrict. That darkness came with you. Instantly, she felt ashamed and unworthy as she turned herself from Eliana. Eliana put her hand on her shoulder, but she jerked her torso away, shrugging it off. Tucking her head in her knees, she made herself as small as possible. Anger and disgust tore at her mind. Why was she there? She did not belong in such a beautiful place. She had tainted it by being there. She did not belong. She sprang to her feet, absolved to leave instantly. She yanked at her cloak to pull it off. She did not deserve it. She pulled again, but it would not budge. Furious, she thrashed around, ripping at it, but it would not go. Rage, blinding rage, ripped out of her throat as she tried over and over to remove the cloak. Her efforts left her unsteady, and as she tore at it again, her whole body buckled and she fell to her knees. Ragged breaths. Wiping her nose with her sleeve, she noticed the butterfly clasp. Could such a tiny clasp keep the cloak bound? Calmer, she reached for the clasp. Separating the wings of the butterfly, she took the cloak off. She rose stiffly. Head bowed, she handed the cloak to Eliana. It is not mine to take, Eliana contended. I can't stay. I don't belong here. You are right, Eliana affirmed. Wincing, another shudder passed over her. Still holding the cloak, she tried again to give it to her. Please take it. I don't deserve it. You are wrong, Eliana avowed. Hot tears spilled onto her green dress. She mocked herself when she thought of what Aneth had said about green representing strength and growth. Strength and growth, she spat out. She wouldn't feel that way when she saw her. Like Paleth, she would be disappointed. Noticing the dark circles on her dress where her tears were falling, she remembered Aneth's grief for those who had died and uttered, "Well, at least I won't have to see anyone die." With that, she dropped the cloak. You already have, Eliana whispered. Thinking Eliana had meant her mother, she raised her eyes, wounded by the cruelty of her statement. Benevolent eyes that flowed with compassion held her gaze. You already have. Her body began to shake with understanding as she nodded, yes. Eliana covered her with the cloak. The welcome weight furthered her understanding that it belonged with her. She did not want to quit. She had not felt capable, deserving, or that she belonged, and that had clouded her understanding. Eliana beamed. When you're ready, secure the clasp. She looked at the separated butterfly wings. She knew they belonged together, whole. Tenderly, she touched each half, symbolic of the past and present. To move forward, they would need to be together. She brought them together. Golden light, like ivy, danced from the clasp, twirling all over her body. She could feel the wonder of the compass, the seed's light, the water's power, and the fullness and strength of a new life. And she knew she was bound. Chapter 6. Trying to get her eyes to adjust, she held the white strip of fabric Eliana had given her as she walked through the door. She knew from the sounds and smells that she was outside, but was surprised it was night. With no moon, it felt eerie. There you are, Tilly. A male voice startled her as she felt him approaching. We have been waiting for you. Exhausted from the binding, but calmer than she had ever felt, she waited for the voice to come closer to identify him. With no light present, she was surprised she could see his face. It was Roan. She chided herself for her slowness. Of course it was Roan. No one else knew her. She thought about correcting him on her name, but didn't know what to correct it to. Hi, Roan. I'm sorry I took so long. Have all the family and friends already left? She saw his puzzled look as he answered, Sorry, Tilly. We were supposed to say our goodbyes at the meadow. It was her turn to be surprised. Why hadn't Aneth said anything when she said she would see Aneth after the binding? Surely she knew the meadow was there, last time seeing each other. Maybe forever. Irritation seized her. She had so many questions. Her only friend had knowingly left her alone. Fine. Roan lightly touched her elbow, bringing her out of her disparaging. Do you want to sit by the fire and meet the others? She didn't, but also didn't want to be rude. Sure. I'm glad you're on a team, Tilly. I know you will add a lot to our success. Happy fella, isn't he? She did not know where her annoyance was coming from, or why she aimed it at Roan, but she knew she felt it. Just moments before, she had felt invincible, and now she felt... What did she feel? She followed Roan through the dark until a bonfire was noticeable. From there, he let her lead. The bonfire reminded her of Aneth's story. She tried to shrug off the comparison. I'm not lost and hurt like Aneth. I don't need help like she did. Don't you? She felt his question in her mind as it ran through her body. Exasperated, she sighed. Roan, a few steps behind her, heard her sigh. Are you okay, Tilly? Not really, escaped her lips before she had time to filter her response. Equally annoyed and ashamed of her honesty, she was grateful for the dark. She heard him come closer. I'm sorry. She shrugged off his kindness. It's okay, she spat out unconvincingly. It's just been a long day. Of course, he responded, and started towards the fire. Stopping, he said, You don't have to be alone, Tilly. I know, she snapped back, harsher than she had meant. They reached the fire, and Roan introduced her. Here she is, everybody. Our final member, Tilly. A menagerie of welcomes came from partly shadowed faces smiling around the fire. Sitting on the last empty stump, she asked a question without knowing she was speaking. How does he know I'm the last one? She heard the answer coming from her left, and looked to see a girl close to her age speaking, because he checked with the other teams, and they were full. So he knew the next person had to be ours, and you are. The girl was smiling kindly. With the realization she was not only the last from their team, but the last of all the teams, she fought the choking feeling that rose immediately to her throat. She tried to fight the panic of feeling pathetic. Her eyes were still adjusting, but the girl on her left's eyes had already adjusted, and she could see what was happening. Choosing her words carefully, she spoke soothingly. I'm Cal. Well, Cality. I was hoping another girl would be on our team. Like a hurt dog, she wanted to lick her wounds alone, but something in the girl's voice spoke peace to her. Her voice was like the musicless music, and she took a deep breath without even knowing she had. Smiling, Cality continued, That makes 5 girls total, the twins and Harma, but she has Larsh. So, if you hadn't come, it would have been just me and the stinky boys. Do you all know each other? She wasn't sure why she felt so defensive, but being last and an outsider brought back the panic she had started to thaw. Most of us are from Wisteria, but you and 2 of the boys, one of them is very handsome, are from other areas. She had used a mocking voice as if quoting someone else when describing the handsome one. She felt like an outsider, last, and didn't know anyone. Not a great start. Aneth's counsel tried to breach her thoughts, but still upset with Aneth, she would not let the counsel sink in. Where are you from, Tilly? Callady asked good-naturedly. Not wanting to associate herself with Aneth, but not having a better answer, she said, Khalid. Unbelievable. I'm named after your song, Khalid's Call. It's my mother's favorite. Fear coursed through her. Afraid she would be caught in her lie. Why couldn't she tell anyone where she was from? A new cold thought chilled her further. What if someone from her village was in the venture? We should sing it together sometime, Callady continued to talk excitedly. She wasn't listening. What would she do if someone she knew recognized her? Forcing herself to think calmly, she assured herself it had been 5 years since she left, and the likeliness of being known was small, as she had never been able to play with any friends. Tilly? Tilly? A touch on her shoulder made her realize she was being talked to. Are you okay, Tilly? Callady's face showed concern. I'm sorry. I'm not feeling so well. Of course. It has been a long day. Let's go to bed. The venture starts early. Page break. Resting on her mat and staring into the darkness, she was bombarded with feelings. Anger at Aneth, worry that someone would find out more about her, fear of the venture and the unknown, exhaustion from the binding and the day. Her mind hurt. She tried to recover the calm she had felt after the binding. Why hadn't it stayed? Knowing she wouldn't sleep, she got up and felt her way out of the cabin they were sleeping in. The fire was still going, and seeing no one by it, she walked gingerly towards it, mindful not to trip in the dark. Finding the stump she had sat on hours before, she wearily lowered herself. She knew she should sleep, but her mind and her body were too restless. You don't have to be alone, Tilly. She heard Roan's gracious words. Her terse response again made her wince. Why did I say that? She whispered under her breath. Thinking of Callady's sympathy and Roan's kindness only furthered her feelings that she didn't belong there. Subconsciously, she huddled deeper into her cloak. Miserable, she murmured, I don't belong anywhere. Scoffing at herself, she stared blankly into the fire. A loud pop from the fire sent embers everywhere. One of them landed on her cloak. In horror, she untucked her arms and legs to ensure the ember did not burn a hole in her cloak. She cautiously stepped towards the fire to inspect her cloak. The ember had landed close to her clasp, but brushing it away, she was relieved to see it had only left a small black smudge. Relieved, she looked up at the sky. Empty, like me. Lowering her eyes back to the fire, she noticed a black shape in front of some of the logs. She instantly held her breath. What was that? Letting her eyes adjust from looking at the sky and then back to the fire, she knew it was someone sleeping. A silent groan fell on her body as she backed towards her stump. Stupid, stupid girl, talking to yourself so pitifully. What were you thinking? Had she woken them with her foolishness? Feeling vulnerable, she knew she could not stay. She knew the cabin was directly behind her. Inching her way along, she walked blindly into the dark. Her foot hit something. She was relieved she had found it. Timidly, she stuck her hand out and found the post connected to the stairs. Climbing the stairs, she found the porch. She decided to sleep on the porch rather than try and find a spot and risk stepping on anyone. Lying on the planks of the porch, she relived the shock at discovering she was not alone by the fire. Who was it? Had they heard her? What had she said? Unsure of what words she had said and which words she had only thought, she knew her thoughts had all been pretty desperate. She cringed. Paleth came to her mind. She was being scolded for taking cookies she had not taken. Maeve, I know you took the cookies. Who else would have? She had no answer. You can admit you took the cookies and go to the cellar for an hour, or you can lie and stay there overnight. She hated the cellar. It was dark and cold, and she hated hearing the rats scurry around. Paleth had not believed her desperate cries. I took the cookies, she lied, desperate not to stay the night in the cellar. A smug look came across Paleth's face as she grabbed her by the arm and led her to the cellar. She knew she needn't ask for a blanket or a lantern, for she would get neither. Slowly, she walked down the stairs. She knew when she reached the bottom, Paleth would close the door. Too scared to cry, she had stood in the dark. She heard the rats climbing around. She breathed very shallowly so she could hear if they were approaching. Her fingers were very cold, but she didn't move, even to cross her arms for warmth. It was the longest Paleth had ever left her in the cellar. She knew Paleth was very angry and had been helpless to stop it. The door had opened and she had been called up. Slowly, she walked up the stairs, unable to raise her eyes. That's right. Keep your eyes down, for that is the treatment of a liar. Paleth had never spoken to her with so much anger, never being able to look decent people in the eyes. She had roughly led her to the kitchen, where she had a glass of milk and a piece of bread on the counter. Eat your dinner and go to bed. I will tell your father you will not join him for dinner. Unable to eat, she stared at the food as Paleth left the room. When Paleth re-entered, she was further provoked that she had not eaten and was walking towards her when the cook entered the kitchen. Paleth, I hope you don't mind. A young urchin came by a little while ago, trying to sell some candles. Pitiful little thing. But I didn't have the heart to send him away, so I bought one for myself and sent him off with some food and cookies. Paleth never said anything about the incident. She had gone to bed as Paleth had told her to. She knew she no longer needed to. She had wanted to. She would play the game. That's how she had known how to lie to her father about the geode. It had come to her years after the event. She had relied on the lie she had never told. Page break. Wake up, Tilly, it's time. Rowan was perched over her, smiling. Unsure of where she was and what was happening, she woke with a jolt. Her jaw felt wet, and she frantically wiped the drool off her face as she stood groggily. Sorry to have to wake you, but we need to get going, Rowan said good-naturedly before bounding down the stairs. I was just coming to wake you, Kaladi sang out from the bottom of the stairs, holding breakfast. I'm last again, aren't I? She asked vulnerably. Yes, but not by much. Harma just got up as well. Remembering her commitment to herself from the night before, she began to play the game. How did you sleep, Kaladi? She asked brightly. I slept great, but you must not have, because when I woke, you were gone. I missed that you were sleeping on the porch, but Rowan pointed you out when I went to help him make breakfast. She felt guilty instantly for not helping with breakfast, but stayed in the game and said chipperly, Well, I better clean up from it then, hadn't I? Already done, Kaladi affectionately responded. It won't happen again, she told herself, and took the food being offered to her. Thank you. She smiled as sincerely as possible. Walking towards where everyone was gathered, she noticed there were distinct groups. She could easily see the red team and counted them. 12. Moving slightly, she was able to see all of the blue team. 12. Remembering she had been last and all the teams had the same number of people, she did not need to count her team to know there were 12. Turning to Kaladi, she asked worriedly, How are there exactly 12 in each group? Did some people get cut off after me? Laughing, Kaladi responded, No one ever gets cut off. I don't know how it works, but there are always 12. How do you know that? Everyone knows that, Kaladi shrugged. Noticing her embarrassed look, she continued, Everyone from Wisteria knows that. Probably the others don't. I'm sorry. That was insensitive of me. Kaladi had a very soothing presence, which helped, but she still felt dumb. Trying to put her at ease, Kaladi continued, We knew because a few of the Wisteria kids weren't going on the venture, that others would be coming. She was trying to understand how the right amount came when Kaladi continued, Rowan let us know when he saw you in town with Aneth that the last one had made it. So you knew I would make it through the meadow and the binding? At this, Kaladi really laughed. Everyone makes it through the meadow and binding. She said it as if it was so easy. It had not been easy. She felt her nerve to keep playing slip. Again, noticing her response had not been received as intended, Cality continued, I'm sorry. There are so many things we are so used to hearing about or knowing, I keep forgetting how different this must be for you. Aneth had made it sound like she couldn't be told anything. Now she was really confused. Trying again, Cality said, even those who don't go on the venture can get a cloak and participate in the binding if they want to. They just leave after. And none of them changed their mind? Cality shrugged. Not that I know of. It was all very confusing. She wanted to ask more questions, but Divya was coming towards them. The talking stopped as Divya approached and stood on the platform they were surrounding. Good morning, brave venturers. We trust you are ready for what lies ahead. It felt as if Divya was looking right at her when she said, Remember, the dark magic is in force and cannot be removed. This first section has no real harm, but the dark magic has caused some to not return. Should you wish to stop now, it would be understood by all. Why were they all there? Pride, a challenge, conquest, tradition. She felt she had stumbled on the whole thing. She wondered if she hadn't gleaned all she needed and should leave. Divya was silent and had her head down. Looking around, she noticed everyone else had their heads down as well. Quickly dropping her head, she thought more about what she should do. She did not know if it made sense to participate. What did she have to gain? Aneth had said most people go home before the inner challenge. She knew she would get to choose if she continued with the inner challenge, but that was only if she made it through the first part. The knowledge that no one had made it to the end and few made it through the inner challenge weighed on her. She was grateful for what she had learned thus far and hoped they all would make it to the inner challenge so that they could go home if they choose. Home? She had no home. Raising her head, she made her decision. She would go on the venture.